Hello, Internet. It's time for another Wednesday's serial. As promised, I'm going to be digging into Swamp Thing. This first video is going to be covering the entire run of Scott Snyder. Now, I can't promise an entire run every video for comic buying reasons in some cases, or maybe just in a volume of what I need to talk about. But I feel Scott Snyder's run was 3 trades and maybe didn't cover enough ground to warrant splitting it up. So we're going to dive in. But before I go too far, I did actually remember, and I totally forgot before, that I have read a few Swamp Thing issues back when I was going through the entire New 52 line. So I'm going to take a minute. I pulled out the clips, and we're going to revisit what I thought back when, and then we'll come to see more of what I thought when I finally got to read it in full. Right, Swamp Thing was beautifully drawn, and I don't want to say any more than that. Not to say that it wasn't interestingly written, but for what happened here and the way the story progressed, this is possibly not even the conclusion of Act 1 of a story. I mean, I know it's serial fiction and all that, of course, but it was literally nothing but set up and done one of the most compelling ways I've seen for this sort of deal, but still just set up. So it's hard to really have an opinion yet. Swamp Thing is an interesting comic. I actually did enjoy this one. There is some very, very text-heavy sections like this, which pacing's a little off in this book, I will say, but the action, bam, moves fast. But what's interesting is this is more like a horror story with Swamp Thing in it than a Swamp Thing-centric comic. I don't know if that's how it used to be, but that's the way this is. The art in here, Yannick Paquette, gorgeous. I really like this book, but I have to be honest, the way it's paced, the way it reads, it will be so much better in trade, just as I anticipated, and I can say that definitively now. So I think it's a great book, and I think you should check it out, especially if you haven't been, but wait for a trade, and I think you'll enjoy it all the more. Swamp Thing Volume 1 covers issues 1 through 7 of the New 52 batch, and it's an interesting introduction in certain ways. Now, we're talking, obviously, Scott Snyder is writing, and then we have Yannick Paquette and Marco Rudy on primary art duties. First and foremost, as I mentioned before, Yannick Paquette does some amazing layouts, does some amazing art. But as I flipped through, I found Marco Rudy did some stuff that seemed to fit the book better. In some ways was a bit more intelligible, while there was less on the page. Sometimes with all the foliage and the plant theme, whatnot, we needed a little less on the page to kind of parse what was important, because the script doesn't always do a good job of pointing us at what we need to be looking at. The gist of this volume revolves around Alec Holland kind of re-finding himself to the green, to the, as he labels it, the monster of the green, though I really don't get a monster as much as they use it later, avatar of it. We also get the resurgence of Abby Holland, and they rekindle their what wasn't a relationship. I don't really claim to understand it, but when they find each other, there's this primal heat between them, and they got a bone, even though they have two sides telling them, no, it's wrong, it's gross to like boobs or whatever. And it ends up that they like kiss, and this huge fallout happens in so many ways, and it's this idea of star-crossed lovers, but it's just so much weight on a kiss for people who are clearly like just drawn to each other. It's just weird. And I don't know prior Swamp Thing. This is where I've started, but this just feels bizarre, and the weight of it is not built up throughout this volume before it ends, and we kind of end up with Alec Holland taking on the Avatar against his will for needs. It's a very bizarre thing. This volume also does a lot to set up Swamp Thing's place in the DCU, showing that Superman is kind of on the level, but also can't really play in this field because it's a different thing, and in some ways more powerful than what Superman does, but it's also a darker side of the DCU. So it's interesting, but that's about it. It seems like there's a lot of weight placed on characters and ideas and labels of different kinds, assuming that you've read prior Swamp Thing, and that kind of makes this a poor introduction. Coming at this really fresh, I can tell you I was relatively lost until I was past this volume and things were already introduced, and I kind of caught up in a way. There's like the green and the rot, and it's all very shonen. Like, the only reason that we're to assume it's important is because it's labeled and mentioned, but there's no assigning of weight to these characteristics throughout the book, and we're supposed to worry about it, and then sometimes after we kind of get that initial moment, then we'll see the fallout of it. A great example is with the green. You know, we kind of get this, oh, it's the green, ooh. And then later we see, like, sporadic growth. We see how when the avatar of that, the Swamp Thing, comes on to Alec Holland, like, how dramatic that is on him. And you kind of get a sense, like, oh, this isn't, like, a Hulk thing or anything. Like, that's his body now. It's this big deal, but that's not explained. That's just kind of, you kind of have to play catch up as you're reading, and it's and for that there's kind of this pacing issue, and so we get that. Yannick Paquette's layouts, as I've said, are beautiful, but Rudio fits the book better. He has a cleaner look, and it fits the cross between the superhero horror vibe a lot better. Instead of trying to be a brilliant comic book, it lets the story unfold. And that story does involve a lot of weird animal versus plant themes, which I enjoy, and the art tackles in some interesting way, bringing in different colors, bringing in dynamic panels. But that's about it in this volume. So that's volume 1, which is Raise the Bones. Volume 2 of Swamp Thing, Family Tree, has much of the same creative talent and builds very well off the first volume, directly coming off of it. We get issues 8 through 11 this time, and then issue 0, which creates a bit of a issue for me. And overall, this volume is exploring not Swamp Thing's family at all, but the Arcane family, which is a bit of a throw-off. Also, the art is super inconsistent. I have a lot of respect for Paquette, but it felt like he was this talented artist that they brought on. He just could not deliver on time, and they brought Rudio in and others clearly just to meet a deadline. And the book really suffers for this constant changing of art, which is constantly changing the tone, which also seems to go along with the writing. We have the Zero issue thrown in right before where we would hit Rotworld, which means we have all this build up to this big thing, and then it drops off. It just feels like, what are we doing here? What's going on? It's annoying. And so that's kind of the major thing about this volume 2, is it's just all over the place. And the art really hits that when you just can't have a consistent artist from issue to issue. So leaving off from where we were in the last volume, we move to kind of concluding with that, dealing with the whole Arcane family. You have Anton Arcade, who's this big, bad guy. And then you have William Arcane, who's like the brother, but he's bad, crazy. But he's kind of lurking in the background. And we have this whole deal with like the rot and the green, and it's this big global influence that was set up with the first issue, where, you know, you see how this is supposed to be affecting, like, you know, Superman, Batman, them defending these cities against this like global existential threat. And that's what this is supposed to be personified on. And so it becomes personal, but at the same time, the fight's really between Abby and the rest of her family, and then her boyfriend, Swamp Thing, is there for backup. And so we don't really have a story about Swamp Thing. And it feels like we kind of lost something here, because we're still trying to figure out who these people are, and we're so far into it. And it's relatively confusing. And part of this whole scuffle and whatnot that happens is that Abby becomes kind of this thing of the rot, similar to how Swamp Thing is that of the green. And in that, we get all these... we see a lot of influences that are loosely connected, but we have this woman corrupted to gain power sort of thing, which we've seen in a lot of different stories over time. It just feels done. Also, the whole idea that this man is the monster, the beast, and he has the beautiful woman that he needs to protect, and you see that really strongly when they finish this and they end back up at the swamp. It's a really bizarre use of conventional gender stereotypes for something that's supposed to feel like a comic that's out there. Also a comic that's twisting where the priority and our main protagonist really should be. And then we go from dealing with Anton Arcane, who, while reading this, I was relatively kind of still lost. Then we go to Unmen, and the feeling of confusion is heightened by the fact that we're dealing with all this, and then 2 pages later we're in a completely different place. It's like, what happened? The transition wasn't there, and this has been throughout. This is just the way Snyder's been doing this book, is that where the issue breaks were, the pickup in the next issue was not as clean as it should be. And it would seem that the nature of doing this would be against DC editorial with trying to make these comics better. Also with the pacing, and we go from this big global conflict to we're back at a shack, and then we have, you know, the pretty girl being chased by a boogeyman in a wooden shack, and it's like a really old school horror comic, and it's like, what just happened? How is this a threat after we're dealing with this global thing? And then after that we jump to the Zero issue, exploring their relationships past, which is just one thing after another. It's bizarre. Also, with Abigail being related to all these other Arcanes, it's really bizarre that she's not part of the family, per se. It's like the only reason she's not part of this plot to rot the world, go overboard, is because she's with Holland. But that means, like, the only reason he's with her is because he planted a seed of goodness in her, which is weird and dirty. Uh, so I don't I don't like that because it makes this what should be this global thing where you have all these motivations for these characters to be dealing with each other and fighting each other, and then you strip away the significance of it by making it a family matter, and it's just this personal squabble. And so it really loses the impact and the like reach of what this story could have been. So I really don't like that. Also, the big bad that was chasing Abby in this, check house, gets a shotgun blast, and then 2 pages later we get animals showing up to lead into Rotworld, and it was just this bizarre thing, and then the flashback doesn't really have anything to do with framing where this thing's going. It's just backstory, and it's just so all over the place, and that's where we end the second volume, and then we go into Rotworld. Volume 3 of Swamp Thing, Rotworld, which is the crossover with Animal Man, and how this trade exactly divvies it up, I don't know, but I feel this is the majority of it. Was interesting and at least stronger than what preceded it. What makes this partly stronger is the Animal Man issues to begin with, but the play between Swamp Thing and Animal Man makes the thing stronger. The whole idea of the green and red and getting some contrast between the two makes the story ideas larger, because we kind of get a view into it instead of dealing with like death and life with the green. You get like this sense of plants and animals and like these different energies, and how animals need to kill, and how plants need to grow, and how something kind of needs to keep an eye over, and that's why the rot's supposed to be there. It's supposed to be this balance of nature, which takes 3 prongs, not just 2, like a yin-yang thing, which makes it really interesting. And then you get how when one goes over, the other 2 need to push back on it, and it's just this never-ending cycle. It's a really interesting idea, and I wish they played more with that idea, because it's ultimately stronger than trying to do some weird superhero stuff with it. We get this big fight between Animal Man and Swamp Thing, which are best buddies for some reason, and they know each other for some reason. They don't explain that at all, which is really annoying because it's key to this issue. And they keep fighting the Antons, the Arcanes, and they end up going through a portal, which seems to be a portal through time to the future. And there's a contingent, at least where Swamp Thing ends up, with plant-related characters. Well, some. There's Deadman and Poison Ivy there, among others. And they're gearing up for this big battle now that Swamp Thing's back, because they're like, you deserted us years ago. He's like, I just fell through this fucking portal. And they're like, oh, jerk. And then it gets weird, because Swamp Thing apparently knows Barbara Gordon, who's taken over for Batman, and this battle needs to be in Gotham. We're not in a Bat book. Why are we dealing with all this? Also, Swamp Thing knows Barbara Gordon. Not Batgirl even, which would be weird enough, but Barbara Gordon. Why? That makes no sense. Like, okay, the Animal Man one, I'll understand. Like, they're avatars of these opposing things. They would have run into each other. I can let that go. I still feel like it's important to the story. We need to explore it. But the fact that Swamp Thing knows Barbara Gordon makes 0 sense. And the fact that they don't explain that is stupid. And so apparently Batman inspires Swamp Thing to be a hero in some recording of the past. But why are we dealing with Batman? This is another New 52 book that deals with Batman. Why? There's no reason for it. It's stupid, it's silly, and it sucks all the air out of the book because Swamp Thing was already there to fight this big threat. He kind of got the wind knocked out of him. Yeah, I understand he needs a minute to get back up, but he doesn't need motivation to go forward. He's already there to do the thing. Just do the thing. It's frustratingly and horribly done. And so we're spending time dealing with character motivation that is more than established, more than anything else. We need to work on character relation. So, what? It's also very notable, and I feel we need to look at it, that the Animal Man issues are stronger and move faster through the story while displaying more character moments and are just paced better. So each page feels like we're moving through, but ultimately gets more accomplished. So, I think that might say a lot about where we're at with this book. And at the end, this whole thing falls apart. We start, and this thing has been built up into this giant war across DC, where all these characters have been, like, zombified, essentially. And we get to see characters killed off for nothing. Gets to be a giant gore fest for no reason. Okay, we're gonna have some fun, some big action, that's fine. But to save the day, Swamp Thing and his girlfriend, which jump into the final battle, which robs Animal Man for having a need to be there, really? So I didn't understand that. It's possible that some of the Animal Man issues were cut out of the trade, but if that's the case, we're like one issue off, I think, and it's just, it ruins the story. I understand this is supposed to be the Swamp Thing side, but this is ultimately a story that we're reading for enjoyment. By cutting out one of the major players, it's rough. But then we get this very video gamey thing where it feels like they're jumping to the final boss, which is Arcane. And this destructive force is operating outside of this portal where the big bad is, so it doesn't make sense that he's not there to operate this spewing out of the rot. And to deal with it, Abby becomes the personification of the rot and basically just flies away, and we're done. And so, again, all this stuff between Animal Man now and then Swamp Thing comes down to Abby and her uncle, their family, having this big fight, which has this repercussion all throughout DC, and then it's done. And then we jump to the future, but they never really seem to jump to the past, and we're supposed to just expect all this didn't happen, but I guess we have two characters that remember it, and okay. So that means all the build-up and all of that didn't happen, but if the way they won is that, in the future, is that Abby becomes the personification of the rot, and then that transfers back to the past, that doesn't even line up. So it's a really sloppy ending. So Snyder's run has left me less than impressed, but I'm going to press on. I understand, and the reason I started this is we're going to be in the next video, but I wanted to kind of catch up and have some introduction to the character and whatnot, which has proven to be useful as I've been reading ahead. I hope you'll join me for the next Swamp Thing video, and I'm going to see if I can't condense my thoughts down a little further. I hope you enjoy. Any tips or thoughts about Snyder's run, I would greatly appreciate. If you would like to see something different in these videos, please let me know. And I will catch y'all soon with some more Swamp Thing.